great to be
There's a
here.
lot of young people. I see it all over the hall and here on Radio Row and the whole bit. It's a lot of fun to be here.
My guest today is Scott Walker, the 45th governor of Wisconsin and president of Young America's Foundation. Governor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here at CPAC.
I
What a great
know.
crowd, right?
Look at all this energy. Look at all these folks. It's great to be
There's a
here.
lot of young people. I see it all over the hall and here on Radio Row and the whole bit. It's a lot of fun to be here.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about young people because young conservatives are so important. But how essential is it to cultivate the next generation of conservatives?
Well, it's not just essential. It has to be the number one priority out there because, as we've seen, wokeism has taken over not only our colleges and universities, it's seeped into our schools, even at the youngest of ages, and not just in government-run schools, but increasingly even in private, in what many schools consider to be religious-based schools. And so we've got to counter that because if we don't, in a state like mine, it won't matter who runs in the future. If this generation, Generation Z, is completely bought in, it's going to be almost impossible to win. Now, I'm an optimist. I talk to young people all the time. I think we can turn that around, but it's going to take a concerted effort.
Now, what are some of those efforts that we've been taking as a movement to bring young people into conservatism?
Well, one of the biggest things is taking it to the campus. So not just with members, but we bring speakers. You think of Daily Signal, some of the great speakers aligned, going on campus, bringing the message there, fighting, in many cases, the cancel culture. A good example, we were trying to bring, in the past, Ben Shapiro to University of California, Berkeley.
Yes.
Which is ironic because once upon a time, decades ago, that was the home of the free speech movement. Instead, they said no, they didn't block it outright, but what they did is they put these unruly restrictions. Couldn't have the speech, the lecture after 3 in the afternoon, ridiculous. Couldn't advertise for it, unbelievable. And then they put on these costs for security that were multi-times what they charge any other group. Well, thankfully, we took them to court. They backed off. We now prevailed. But free speech is something that's guaranteed in the Constitution, but it should be revered on our college campuses. And so taking it there to every campus saying, we're not going to back down, not just for our students, but for our speakers and even some of the conservative educators, we're not going to back down. The other part that we do, though, is broadcast. That we go on to our podcast, and we had 342 million views on all our platforms last year, mainly of just people who are at our conferences and our lecture speakers getting the message out about what it means to be a conservative.
Absolutely, and those are fantastic numbers, so congratulations on that. But I'm so curious because polling suggests that young people are just so overwhelmingly liberal.
Yeah.
Why? It doesn't seem like...
Because that's all they hear. You know, if all you heard, if you grew up in a town and all you heard about how one football or one basketball team was the greatest, typically people grow up thinking that way because that's what you hear. And in sports, it's not a bad thing to be a homer. But when it comes to education, particularly higher ed, but even younger than that, if all you hear is one side of the equation, then that education system has failed the student. Because part of education is supposed to be exposing people to ideas, thinking critically. Very little that's happening in our schools and colleges and universities across the country. So I say part of it, it's really a two-step process. One is you got to break through. You got to invoke the Constitution. You got to invoke higher standards for free speech. And that means more than just saying you're for free speech. It means actually having requirements and punishments for those who try to block it. Because a lot of campuses, these radicals come in and they'll literally block speakers from even coming on campus and talking about ideas, which is unfair to all those other students. Then the other part is once we have that access point, we've got to do a better job of articulating our message, talking about it in simple terms. It's freedom and opportunity for everyone. The left, they want to divide students. They want to divide Americans in general.
Right.
If you're against them, doesn't matter the subject, you're racist, you're sexist, you're transphobic, whatever the issue is or is not, they'll call you that. We need to counter, not with our own nicknames or attacks, but rather by just saying, hey, we want freedom and opportunity for everyone. We love America, and we want everyone, regardless of age, race, sex, background, to have those same freedoms and opportunities.
Now, the thing you mentioned about the Ben Shapiro anecdote is sort of indicative of how these conversations happen across the campuses across America and online. I mean, big tech is overly censorious of conservative voices. So when we're fighting up against these forces that want us to just not talk, how do we get the message out?
Well, it's a combination of things. The left is very good at working together. We've got to do a better job of that for those of us who are freedom fighters, of saying it's not just one channel or another, it's working together as much as we can to articulate those shared visions that I talked about, of freedom and opportunity, and what does that mean. We've also got to not concede any ground. While it's great to think of creating new alternative platforms, which I'm all for, that doesn't mean that we cede other opportunities. I'm going to go to every campus. Even if I'm not welcome, I'm going to be there. In fact, in some cases, it's more important to be at the University of Wisconsin than it is at Hillsdale. Because at Hillsdale, they're getting a good education. At UW or many other colleges and universities across America, we're not. And then we're going to play on every platform. We saw nearly a doubling of our YouTube subscribers, for example, last year. Well, I think that's because our students and our supporters, not only do they want to see our speakers, they particularly are interested in the Q&A. They want to hear, how do I respond to that radical asking that damning question? Whether it's a teaching assistant, a professor, or oftentimes just a fellow classmate, or for people who are not in school, it may be somebody on your Twitter feed who just keeps attacking. How do you respond to that in a way that's effective? And effective means both the facts, but also acknowledging the reality of the situation.
Are we seeing that young conservative students are making these moves themselves to start to try to bring people into the fold?
There's no doubt about it, and we need to be there. Groups like Young America's Foundation and others, we can't do it alone. We need to give them the reinforcements. Well, what I've found, what's really encouraging and makes me an optimist, is that young people, given the facts, the big reaction. We just had, for example, the Reagan Ranch at the end of last year. We had one of our sessions was on escaping communism. And part of it, in fact, YouTube actually put a censor comment on it because we had some really graphic but real discussions of people who had been victims of communism, socialism. They didn't block it outright, but they put comments on it, which I thought in some ways young people actually were more likely to go to. But that session, the big takeaway from our students was they were upset, not at us. They're upset at their schools, saying, why don't we learn more about this? Why aren't we being told this? And so that's encouraged them to go out and say, we're going to share this message. We're going to tell other people about the contrast between communism, Marxism, socialism versus freedom, freedom and opportunity. More than just one part or the other. That's really what's at stake.
Absolutely. So your panel here at CPAC focused on fighting woke mobs on college campuses, which is just, such a big problem. We were just talking about how these people will cancel conservative speakers. What is Young America's Foundation specifically doing to make sure that speakers are allowed to speak?
Well, a combination, we work with groups like Alliance Defending Freedom to literally go to court. We'll go to court anywhere and anywhere, not only for our speakers, but any conservative voice. So if it's some other group, it's the college Republicans, whoever it might be, we'll be there. We'll work together with our partners. So part of it's pushing free speech, but it's also exposing the radical wokeism and the negative impact it's had on our students. I'll give you a good example. We have this tip line, yaf.org/tips. We get them from all over the country. One tip came up from a professor at Iowa State, so not either end of the country on the coast, but literally in the middle of America. English teacher, at the beginning of her class, she said, I'm not going to allow you to write anything that opposes abortion on demand, that opposes same-sex marriage, or that opposes BLM, the organization.
Wow.
Now, we exposed that. We said, this is, no matter what you think even on those issues, how can you possibly say that people can't write about that in an English class? We exposed that, and thankfully in the state of Iowa, they have good regents, and they invoked their free speech policy and said, no, that's wrong, and they took action. But most places, the regents, the board, the administrators, and others just don't put teeth into these things, and so we've got to go to court. Part of our lesson going forward is not just to fight this in court, to go to governors, to go to lawmakers, to make the push to say, hey, if you want money, if you want state and federal funding, you've got to have free speech standards that actually protect free speech.
I have one final question for you, Governor, and that is for these children and these kids who are on the college campuses. They're dealing with this every day in their classroom with an English teacher that says you can't write against something I disagree with. How do they deal with that? What is your advice to them?
Well, literally come to us or other organizations like us, because we can help amplify that. If it's just one student, it's overwhelming. And that's the strategy of the left. Cancel culture is out there not because they want to fear debate, because they don't.
Right.
I point out one of the students who brought me to Stanford 2 years ago to speak happens to be Susan Rice's son. He's a conservative.
Yeah.
He loves his mother, but he disagrees with her on a lot of these policy issues. If we can get the facts to someone like John and actually have him be a full, thoughtful conservative, there's no reason why anybody else can't. But that's why the left doesn't want to play by those rules, because their ideas don't work. We've seen it. Where else in the world have we seen communism or socialism work? It just doesn't in its purest sense of each of those phrases. And so if someone feels like they're being intimidated, if someone feels like they're being attacked, if someone feels like their voice isn't being heard, come to us, we'll help, we'll get you involved, we'll bring you a conference, we'll surround you, we'll give you a great big hug and surround you with other people who share your thoughts. And that in of itself is encouraging, because a lot of those students can say, I'm going to go back to my campus and I'm going to help spread the word.
Excellent. That was Scott Walker, the 45th governor of Wisconsin and president of Young America's Foundation. Governor Scott, it was a pleasure talking with you.
Good to be with you too.